The city was alive in the shadows. Gotham never slept, its streets pulsed with a rhythm of fear and corruption, a heartbeat that Bruce Wayne had memorized through endless nights on its rooftops. Perched high above the alleys, cloaked in the armor of the Bat, he moved silently across concrete ledges. The rain slicked his cape, the neon lights below flickered, and sirens wailed distantly, all familiar notes in the symphony of crime. This was his domain, a kingdom of shadows where he was both hunter and protector. But even Gotham had its strange moments, nights where unease settled heavier than usual. Tonight was different. There was no scream echoing from an alley, no crime to intercept. Instead, a chill swept over the city, unnatural and deep. The air trembled as if the world itself had drawn a breath. Batman froze, every instinct honed by years of vigilance sharpening to a blade's edge. Something was wrong, not with Gotham, but with reality itself. Above him, the clouds split open in silence. No lightning, no thunder. Just a rift, a jagged wound carved into the night sky, glowing with unnatural violet light. It was not a storm. It was something older, darker, beyond comprehension. Bruce's mind raced. Anomaly, energy distortion, a weapon. He scanned with his cowl's sensors, but every reading fractured into static. His logic failed to categorize what his eyes confirmed. And in that moment, he realized that Gotham was no longer the predator's cage he knew. Something was reaching for him. The rift widened, spilling light that was not light. Space, bent, sound warped, and for a heartbeat, Bruce Wayne, the man who never feared anything but his own failures, felt the weight of true dread. Yet fear did not freeze him. It sharpened him. He leapt, cape flaring, aiming to escape the anomaly's pull. But the air itself twisted, gravity betrayed him, and he was dragged upward like prey caught in a hunter's snare. His last glimpse of Gotham was the skyline swallowed in violet fire, his city vanishing beneath a cosmic wound. Then came silence. Cold, metallic silence. Batman landed hard, his armored body clanging against an iron floor. He rose quickly, instinct steady despite confusion, scanning his surroundings. Gone were Gotham's lights and shadows. Now he stood within vast, cavernous halls carved from steel and stone, illuminated by sterile, golden lumens. Towering statues loomed in alcoves, figures of armored giants bearing two-headed eagles and weapons of war. Strange banners hung from ceilings impossibly high, marked with symbols alien to him. Bruce's detective's mind catalogued everything. The air was thin, mechanical, filled with the smell of oil and ozone. He heard distant chanting, deep voices, echoing with ritual rhythm. The architecture spoke of power and order, yet there was no warmth, no humanity. Gotham's filth had been replaced by something far more rigid, a world where law was not twisted by corruption but absolute, cold and merciless. Figures emerged from the shadows of the great hall. They were giants, armored in ceramite, their faces hidden behind helmets shaped like grim visages of death. Each was larger than any man Bruce had ever encountered, their presence overwhelming, radiating an aura of unbreakable will. For a moment, Batman measured them as opponents, calculating angles of attack, noting weaknesses in gait and armor. But calculation faltered when he realized the truth. These were not men as he understood them. They were something beyond, soldiers built like gods of war. One stepped forward, his voice resonant and metallic. He spoke words in a language Bruce did not know. Yet somehow the meaning burned into his mind. The Imperium has chosen. Confusion rippled through him, but he steadied himself, as he always did. He was Bruce Wayne, forged in fear, sharpened by pain, unbroken by loss. Yet here, in this place of giants, he was no longer the predator of Gotham. He was the anomaly, a man torn from his world, thrown into the grim darkness of another. And as he stood in that hall, the bat within him stirred, whispering a truth he had always known. Gotham was gone. His war was not over. It had only changed. The great hall of giants did not wait for explanations. From the moment Bruce was taken into its custody, his fate was no longer his own. He was stripped of his cape and cowl, his armor dismantled, every piece of equipment that made him Batman taken away until only Bruce Wayne remained, a man among titans. Yet even here, in this alien world of impossible warriors, he refused to bow. The process began with trials designed to break body and spirit alike. Hundreds of aspirants were gathered, most little more than feral youths dragged from forgotten worlds. They fought for survival not only against each other but against starvation, exhaustion, and cruel overseers who expected most to die. Bruce observed them all with the same calculating gaze he once reserved for Gotham's criminals. Their movements, their weaknesses, their desperation, all data to be catalogued, analyzed, and exploited if necessary. Combat tests followed, brutal contests staged in blood-soaked arenas. Armed with nothing but crude blades, aspirants were forced to battle one another until only a handful remained. Bruce entered these fights with surgical precision, striking not out of bloodlust, but with the same cold efficiency that once dismantled Gotham's underworld. He refused needless cruelty. Where others hacked blindly, he targeted tendons, nerves, and joints, disabling opponents with swift, calculated strikes. Even stripped of his gadgets, the detective's mind remained his most dangerous weapon. And yet, in the eyes of the overseers, mercy was weakness. His refusal to revel in slaughter earned suspicion, though his victories could not be denied. Then came the surgeries, pain beyond imagination, inflicted not as punishment but as transformation. Organs were cut, replaced, and enhanced bones were infused with adamantine blood, were saturated with chemicals and synthetic glands. Few survived the process. Screams filled the chambers, some ending abruptly as aspirants failed under the knife. Bruce endured, not because he was stronger than the rest, but because his will refused to surrender. Every agony was catalogued, compartmentalized, and endured. Fear was a weapon, and he had mastered it long ago. Pain would not break him, it would shape him. Still, the greatest trial was not of the flesh, but of the mind. Days and nights blurred into one another as indoctrination rituals began. Liturgical chants, sermons on the Emperor's divinity, visions forced into their minds by psychic manipulation, all designed to erase individuality and forge unquestioning loyalty. Many aspirants accepted the Imperium's creed without resistance, their identities smothered under blind faith. But Bruce Wayne was no ordinary man. He endured the sermons, repeated the chants when necessary, yet deep within he held fast to something greater than the Imperium could understand. Justice. Not dogma, not blind obedience, but the relentless pursuit of what was right. This resistance placed him in constant tension. Chaplains saw a warrior who followed orders yet thought too deeply. Librarians sensed the iron wall of his mind, unyielding to their psychic probes. Some called him promising. Others whispered he was dangerous. But despite doubts, the results spoke louder than suspicions. Bruce excelled in strategy simulations, defeating opponents not through brute force, but through tactics so precise that even the trainers could not deny his brilliance. His brother's iron arms began to notice too. Where they charged headlong into danger, he mapped paths of survival. Where they obeyed orders without question, he dissected them, refining strategies for greater efficiency. He was not a machine of war, but something rarer, a mind honed to perfection, a blade sharper than any bolt around. The trials dragged on for months, each one a crucible that reduced men to ashes. But Bruce did not break. He endured, adapted, and evolved. Each scar became a reminder not of suffering, but of resolve. He was no longer the Batman of Gotham, nor yet the Astartes of the Imperium. He was something in between, a man reforged by both justice and fire. And as the last of the aspirants fell away, leaving only survivors chosen for greatness, Bruce Wayne stood among them. He had not only survived the trials, but he had triumphed. The crucible was complete. Bruce Wayne, who once prowled Gotham's rooftops as a man wrapped in shadows, now stood reborn beneath the stern gaze of the Imperium. His flesh had been torn apart and remade with the organs and enhancements of an Astartes. His skeleton, once strong but mortal, was laced with adamantine. His blood, once human, now coursed with engineered glands that burned away weakness. He was taller, broader, and stronger than any man of Gotham could ever imagine. Yet behind the augmented body, the same calculating mind endured, sharpened, not erased. The armor came next. Forged from ceramite and steel, the Mark VII plate enclosed his transhuman frame, its weight both oppressive and empowering. Every hiss of the seals, every click of locking mechanism sounded like chains fastening him to a destiny he had not chosen. Aquila stretched across his chest, the two-headed eagle of the Imperium declaring his allegiance. Yet as the plate sealed around him, Bruce could not help but see another symbol beneath it, the bat, ever watching, ever enduring. Two identities now coiled within him, the Imperium's soldier and Gotham's knight. The first time he moved in the armor, the sensation was surreal. What once felt heavy became fluid, every step powered by servos, every strike magnified by transhuman strength. He tested it with measured precision, throwing punches that could shatter steel, raising weapons designed to fell armies. But with every act of power came an echo of caution. Power unchecked was not victory, it was tyranny. And Bruce had spent his entire life ensuring that power, in any form, must serve justice. The chaplains proclaimed his transformation a triumph. To them, another son of the Emperor had been born. They saw loyalty, strength, and faith written into his new form. Yet they did not see the shadows that clung to him still, the remnants of a man who had once fought for something beyond obedience. During sermons, Bruce spoke the litanies, but behind his voice lingered doubt. He accepted the Emperor's divinity in word, but in thought he measured the cost of blind devotion. Justice demanded clarity, and clarity demanded choice. Among his new brothers, he stood both as one of them and apart. They admired his precision in battle drills, his strategies in tactical simulations. He led squads through scenarios where others would have faltered, predicting enemy movement with uncanny foresight. Yet whispers followed him. He did not revel in battle cries. He did not kneel as deeply in prayer, and his eyes held a different fire. Where others looked upward for salvation, Bruce looked inward, carrying with him the eternal vow he made in a dark alley long ago. As training culminated, his chapter held a ceremony of naming. Each initiate was declared a warrior of the Adeptus Astartes, their old selves buried forever. But as Bruce's name was spoken, a strange silence filled him. Bruce Wayne was gone, at least in the eyes of the Imperium. Yet Batman, the symbol, the shadow, the vow against chaos and injustice, refused to die. In this moment, the fusion of two identities solidified. He was a space marine, yes, but he was also something the Imperium could never fully control. The Dark Knight. The imagery was undeniable. Standing in full armor, helm beneath his arm, his cape of black cloth draped across the ceramite plates, he resembled neither the heroes of Gotham nor the angels of death the Imperium revered. He was something new, a shadow forged of two worlds. The aquila blazed across his chest, but in the dark his silhouette was unmistakable, a bat reborn in steel and flame. And so began his new war. The chaplains spoke of duty to the Emperor, the commanders of obedience to doctrine. Yet in Bruce's mind, the vow remained the same as it had in Gotham. The war against injustice could not be abandoned. In the 41st millennium, injustice wore different faces: heresy, xenos, chaos. But the principle was eternal. He would fight not because he was ordered to, but because he must. The chapter closed with his gaze turned outward, beyond the training halls, toward the stars. Gotham was gone, but the galaxy itself was now his battlefield. The Dark Knight had been reforged into something greater than man, greater than legend, a weapon of justice in a universe that knew only war. In the aftermath of victory, silence fell across the chapter's fortress monastery. The Ork incursion had been repelled, the green tide scattered into dust and ash. Yet within the stone halls where warriors of the Adeptus Astartes gathered, no songs of triumph echoed. Instead, whispers passed between armored giants, their voices low, uncertain, and edged with unease. Batman's methods had secured victory, but they had not followed the path of tradition. While his brothers charged with bolters blazing and chainswords roaring, he had directed squads into ambush positions, diverted Ork warbands with traps, and used diversions to split their numbers. He had turned the battlefield into a chessboard, each move calculated with ruthless precision. To some, his tactics were nothing less than genius, efficient, surgical, and undeniable. To others, they reeked of heresy. The chaplains, guardians of faith, were the most unsettled. They preached that the Emperor's will was carried out not through cleverness but through devotion, fury, and unyielding faith. Batman's refusal to kneel before dogma, his cold reliance on intellect, unsettled them. "He fights like a man, not like an Astartes," one chaplain muttered in the reclusium, his voice echoing among the candles. Where is his zeal? Where is the fire of devotion that should burn in his heart? Yet others disagreed. Some captains argued that his brilliance on the battlefield saved lives, not just Marines, but civilians who would otherwise have been left to die. "He does not waste resources," one officer remarked with a grudging tone. "He turns even savagery into order." Perhaps that is the Emperor's will, simply expressed differently. Among his brothers, the divide grew sharper. There were those who admired him, seeing in him a leader capable of winning wars with fewer losses. But admiration curdled into suspicion when they noticed he did not chant as fervently in liturgies, nor join in the zealous proclamations of faith before battle. Bruce Wayne, though outwardly disciplined, carried a silence in him that unsettled others. His devotion was not displayed through fire and chant, but through action, a kind of loyalty that was too quiet, too reserved for the Imperium's rigid expectations. Bruce himself felt the weight of these whispers, but did not bend. He had endured indoctrination, learned the words of devotion, and even spoken them when necessary. But within he carried a code the Imperium could not extinguish: justice. That word still burned brighter than faith or obedience. To him, the Emperor was not a god but an ideal: order, unity, and the hope of protecting humanity from endless destruction. But ideals were not absolutes. They demanded reason, discernment, and sometimes defiance. And Bruce Wayne had never been a man to surrender reason. The tension grew during strategy councils. When commanders plotted campaigns, Bruce often questioned their reliance on ritual tactics. He would quietly suggest alternatives, strategies that bent the rules but promised cleaner victories. Sometimes he was heeded, and the results were undeniable. Other times his suggestions were dismissed as dangerous, unbecoming of a true son of the Emperor. With each debate, the line between loyalty and insubordination blurred. The librarians watched him too, their psychic senses brushing against the walls of his mind. They found no corruption, no whisper of the warp, but what they did find was unsettling in another way. A mind fortified by sheer willpower, impossible to fully penetrate, impossible to completely break. For the Imperium, which thrived on absolute obedience, such individuality was a threat. And so the doubt spread. Was this warrior truly a gift to the chapter, a weapon sharper than any other? Or was he a danger waiting to unravel the very fabric of loyalty that bound the Adeptus Astartes together? His victories spoke of loyalty, yet his silence spoke of something else, a man apart, unwilling to lose himself fully to the creed. Bruce felt their stares in the training halls and heard the muttered words when he passed, but he endured it with the same calm he once carried in Gotham. Suspicion was familiar to him, so was doubt. He had lived as an outsider before, and he would do so again. For the Dark Knight, doubt was not a chain but a shield, proof that he had not yet surrendered the last piece of himself. The drop pod rattled with the fury of descent, its walls trembling as fire streaked past the viewing slits. Inside, Space Marines stood ready, armored titans clutching bolters, silent but for the murmurs of liturgies whispered through vox links. Batman stood among them, encased in ceramite, his helm sealed, his frame transhuman. Yet while the others prayed, his mind raced. He was not reciting litanies, he was calculating. The target was a frontier world, a wasteland scarred by Ork invasion. Greenskin warbands roamed unchecked, their crude fortresses belching smoke into the sky. The Imperium's orders were simple: cleanse the infestation, leave nothing alive. For most Astartes, this meant one thing: charge into the fray, meet the Orks in brutal melee, and drown the battlefield in blood. But for Bruce Wayne, the battlefield was not chaos. It was a puzzle waiting to be solved. The pod slammed into the dirt, its doors detonating outward. The Marines surged forward like unleashed fury, bolters roaring, chainswords grinding. Orks bellowed in response, a tide of green muscle and iron hurtling across the plains. Yet while his brothers advanced in a straight line of righteous fire, Batman hesitated only long enough to scan the battlefield. His enhanced eyes measured distances, noted terrain features, and mapped out choke points. To him, every Ork mob was a piece on a board, every scrap of terrain another variable. He moved differently. While others marched headlong, Bruce flanked wide, slipping into ruins and shadows. His movements echoed the predator he once was in Gotham, only now magnified by the power of an Astartes. Orks spotted him, roaring, charging with crude axes raised high. But they fell into traps of his own making. He triggered structural collapses, crushing mobs beneath rubble. He ignited fuel lines, herding them into narrow corridors where his bolter fire cut them down in controlled bursts. Each move was precise, each kill calculated, a dance of strategy rather than fury. To his brothers, his methods seemed alien. Through the Vox, one Marine barked, "Advance, brother. Face them with courage, not trickery." But Batman ignored the call. Courage was not a blind charge, courage was winning against impossible odds. And where others saw the Orks' brute strength, he saw their weakness, their predictability, their hunger for direct combat. He fed that hunger, lured them into traps, and dismantled their numbers piece by piece. As the battle raged, his squad began to notice the results. While they expended endless bolter rounds in brutal firefights, Batman's squads suffered fewer casualties. His diversions split Ork mobs into smaller, weaker groups. His precision eliminated threats before they grew overwhelming. He was fighting not as a zealot, but as a tactician. For the first time, the Dark Knight's mind fused fully with the Imperium's might, creating a warrior unlike any the chapter had seen. Hours passed. Smoke choked the skies, the ground littered with broken bodies of green and ceramite alike. At last, the Ork warboss appeared, a towering brute armored in plates of rusted iron, roaring defiance. The Astartes answered with a charge, but Batman hung back, studying. The warboss's swings were wide, devastating, but reckless. Batman darted in with precision, landing blows not of brute force but of calculation, strikes aimed at weak joints in the crude armor, feints that forced the beast into predictable patterns. When the warboss finally stumbled, Batman struck true, detonating a charge beneath its chest plate. The monster fell, and the battle ended. Victory belonged to the chapter, but it was unlike any victory they had known. Some Marines cheered his cunning, praising his ability to save lives and achieve decisive success. Others whispered uneasily. His methods had been effective, yes, but they lacked the zeal, the holy fury of an Astartes. He had fought like a predator in the dark, like a man who still carried the ways of another world. Bruce felt the weight of their stares as they returned to the fortress monastery. He did not gloat, nor defend himself. To him, the battlefield was proof enough. Efficiency had won where dogma might have faltered. Yet he already knew what the whispers meant. In Gotham, he had always been feared by those who did not understand him. In the Imperium, history seemed destined to repeat. The war against the Orks ended with fire and silence. The frontier world, once teetering on the edge of annihilation, stood reclaimed by the Imperium's might. For most chapters, the reports would have been routine. Another battle, another tally of the dead, another list of victories credited to the Emperor's will. But the records of this campaign told a different story. They spoke of precision beyond doctrine, of strategies that did not fit the mold of the Codex Astartes, of a warrior who thought as much as he fought. Those reports traveled upward. Captains, at first reluctant to mention the anomaly, could not ignore the efficiency of the campaign. Casualties had been lower than projections, and objectives had been achieved faster than predicted. The cause was traced not to a commander of long renown, but to a newly ascended brother, a warrior known among his chapter only as the Bat. The whispers began. Among the reclusiam, chaplains called him troubling, his victories tainted by a lack of holy fervor. Among strategists, he was called indispensable, a tactical mind sharper than any blade. Some praised him as an example of what adaptability could achieve, others denounced him as a dangerous aberration. In the Imperium, however, even whispers have weight. They traveled, passed from officer to officer, scribe to scribe, until they reached ears that mattered far more. The Inquisition was the first to notice. The Ordo Xenos keeps careful watch on anomalies, and here was one that did not fit any category. A space marine, yes, but not fully aligned with the rigidity expected of the Emperor's chosen. He obeyed, yet not blindly. He fought, yet not with faith as fuel. An inquisitor requested transcripts of battle logs, studying how this warrior had dismantled Ork mobs with surgical precision. The report ended with a single note, potentially dangerous. Observe further. The librarians of the chapter, too, found themselves unsettled. When they extended their psychic senses toward him, they met not corruption but walls. Iron walls of willpower that resisted even the gentlest probes. It was not the resistance of a heretic hiding secrets, nor the madness of one touched by the warp. It was something stranger, a fortress of thought built through discipline alone. To a psyker, it was like staring into a shadow that gave nothing back. And so the whispers continued to climb. In the vast halls of the Administratum, clerks catalogued his victories. In the dark chambers of the Inquisition, his name was spoken with suspicion. In the watchful minds of the librarians, his existence became an enigma. No single voice yet cried heresy, but none could ignore the anomaly that had appeared among the angels of death. There were even rumors, impossible, unprovable, that the Emperor himself had stirred. Some claimed a ripple had passed through the warp, faint but undeniable, during the battle where Batman felled the Ork warboss. The master of mankind, enthroned in silence for 10,000 years, was said to have flickered in awareness. Perhaps it was only superstition, the kind born of overzealous scribes desperate to assign divine meaning to coincidence. But among the Imperium's faithful, even whispers of such things carry the weight of prophecy. For Bruce, none of this was visible. He continued to train, to serve, to fight beside his brothers. Yet he felt the change. Eyes lingered longer on him in the halls. Superiors asked more pointed questions during councils. He caught chaplains watching him as though waiting for a slip of faith, a moment of weakness to expose. And in the shadows of his thoughts he recognized the pattern. Gotham had once branded him an outlaw for standing apart from its corruption. Now the Imperium, far greater and far harsher, was beginning to see him in the same way. The section of his story ended not with resolution but with the weight of destiny pressing heavier upon him. He was no longer merely a soldier in a galaxy of endless war. He was becoming something else, a point of divergence in a universe that despised divergence. Forces beyond his chapter, beyond even the reach of his understanding, had begun to watch. Some saw a savior, some saw a threat. And somewhere, deep in the silence of the warp, the possibility remained that even the Emperor of mankind, eternal upon his throne, had felt the shadow of the bat. The sky was alive with fire. The frontier world's atmosphere burned as spores rained down in endless torrents, blotting out the stars. Below, the ground writhed with alien life, forests and plains alike consumed by an advancing tide of chitin and teeth. The Tyranids had arrived, and with them came the promise of annihilation. The chapter deployed swiftly, their drop pods slamming into soil already seething with bioforms. Space Marines poured out, bolters roaring, chainswords shrieking, their war cries rising to match the shrieks of the swarm. To the Imperium, this was not war, but extermination. A holy purge against beasts that could not be reasoned with. Yet as Bruce Wayne, now fully a Space Marine, stood amidst the chaos, he did not see a swarm to be purged blindly. He saw patterns. Every shriek, every lunge, every surge of bodies carried rhythm and purpose. The Tyranids were not a mindless flood, but a predator with layers of instinct and coordination. Where his brothers saw only horror, Batman saw a puzzle. He moved differently than the rest. While his squad unleashed volleys into the tide, Bruce analyzed. He noted the way smaller creatures hurled themselves at defenses, their deaths paving paths for larger beasts. He marked how the monstrous carnifexes only advanced once the smaller gaunts had stripped firepower from their enemies. Every motion had meaning. Every kill was a piece in a larger pattern, and patterns could be broken. Through the Vox, he gave orders, not the standard calls for a charge, but instructions that confused even his brothers. Divert fire left, collapse that ridge. Hold position until they commit. Some hesitated, unwilling to obey tactics so far removed from the Codex Astartes, but those who followed soon saw the effect. By directing fire into choke points, Batman created narrow kill zones. By collapsing terrain features, he forced the swarm into channels where their numbers became a hindrance rather than an advantage. The Tyranids adapted quickly, shifting their attack routes, sending heavier organisms to smash through obstacles. But Batman adapted faster. He anticipated their adjustments, laying traps that exploited their instincts. Fuel lines were detonated in sequence, herding gaunts into overlapping fields of fire. Lictors that stalked unseen were baited into ambushes of his own. At every turn, the Dark Knight was one step ahead, his mind dismantling the hive's endless hunger with precision no zealot's bolter could achieve. The battlefield became a chessboard. To the swarm, he was no longer prey, but predator, a figure who turned their instincts against them. His brothers, initially skeptical, began to see results. Casualties dropped. Ammunition was conserved. Entire broods were annihilated before they could overwhelm defenses. Yet even as admiration grew, unease deepened. This was not how Astartes fought. They were meant to be the Emperor's fury, not hunters lurking in shadows, turning war into cold calculation. At the heart of the assault, a hive tyrant emerged, its massive wings blotting out the ruined sky. The beast radiated command, its psychic will binding the swarm into deadly cohesion. Where others charged to meet it head-on, Batman hung back, studying. He noted how the tyrant favored sweeping arcs of its scything talons, how its synaptic control faltered when line of sight was disrupted. He relayed orders, suppress its vision, isolate its guard, strike at its blind side. His brothers, though unnerved by his methods, obeyed. The tyrant's fall was not swift nor glorious. It was calculated. Its guards were lured into traps and annihilated. Its wings were crippled by precise fire. And when it finally roared its last, it was Batman who delivered the killing blow. Not out of vengeance or fury, but because logic dictated it. The hive tyrant fell, and with it the swarm fractured into disarray. The battlefield quieted, though the ground still quivered with scattered stragglers. Smoke curled from ruins, mingling with the acrid stench of alien ichor. Batman stood among his brothers, victorious, yet isolated. They looked at him not with the camaraderie of shared triumph, but with a mixture of awe and suspicion. His genius had won the day, but at what cost to faith? For Bruce, there was no question. The Tyranids had been a predator unlike any he had faced, but like all predators, they could be studied, outwitted, and defeated. To him, the swarm was not invincible, only another puzzle solved. Yet, as he surveyed the battlefield, he realized the truth. His greatest challenge would not be alien hordes, but the Imperium itself. His methods had saved lives, but in a galaxy where individuality was feared, that might be the very thing that damned him. The battlefield still smoked from the Tyranid slaughter when the whispers began. Though the hive tyrant lay broken, its carapace shattered under precision fire and calculated strikes, the victory felt hollow within the halls of the fortress monastery. For some, Batman's tactics had been a revelation, proof that the Imperium's eternal war could be fought with more than brute force. For others, his methods stirred unease, gnawing at the edges of dogma. In the Reclusiam, chaplains argued in hushed tones. "He fights without zeal," one intoned, the glow of votive candles casting sharp shadows across his skull-helmed visage. "He sees enemies as puzzles, not as abominations to be cleansed. There is no faith in his fury, only cold calculation." To them, Batman's lack of open devotion was more dangerous than heresy. It was something subtler, harder to name, the sin of thinking differently. Commanders debated as well. Reports listed victories, reduced casualties, preserved supplies, all undeniable outcomes of Bruce's precision. Yet efficiency was not the Imperium's creed. Faith was. Some captains feared that by praising such methods, they risked undermining centuries of sacred tradition. "A blade without zeal," one remarked grimly, "is a weapon without purpose." Among his brothers, the divide sharpened. Younger Marines spoke in awe, recounting how Batman had dismantled Tyranid broods with strategies they had never imagined. "He saved dozens of us," one whispered, in defiance of the chaplains. "He saw the swarm as it truly was and outwitted it." But veterans shook their heads. "That is not the way of the Emperor's sons," came the response. "To think as men do, not as angels of death, is to invite corruption." Batman heard their doubts. He felt their eyes linger when he walked the training halls and saw the silent disapproval in the chaplain's gazes. Yet he did not waver. For Bruce, doubt and suspicion were nothing new. Gotham had once mistrusted him too, branding him an outlaw for daring to fight corruption his own way. The Imperium was no different, only larger, more suffocating, more unforgiving. Suspicion was the cost of independence. He had accepted that long ago. Still, the weight of the Imperium's judgment was heavier here. He was not a lone vigilante moving through alleys. He was one among the Adeptus Astartes, a cog in the Imperium's unyielding machine. To stand apart was to risk being crushed. And so, even as he devised new tactics, Bruce measured his steps carefully. He obeyed orders outwardly, recited litanies when required, even raised his voice in chants before battle. But beneath the surface, his code endured untouched. And it was that private fidelity that troubled his brothers most. The librarians sensed it as well. When they probed his mind with subtle psychic touches, they encountered walls of iron will, unyielding and impenetrable. No warp taint clung to him. No whispers of chaos. Only a fortress of thought built through discipline and unbroken will. To the librarians, this was as disturbing as corruption itself. A man whose mind could not be touched was a man who could not be controlled. And so the word began to creep into the whispers. Heresy. Not the open kind of chaos worship, but something more insidious. Independence. Individuality. To think for oneself in the Imperium was dangerous enough, to succeed at it was perilous. For a moment, some wondered aloud if the Bat was not a savior, but a seed of rebellion, one that could spread if left unchecked. Bruce knew what they would never admit. Their fear was not of him failing, but of him succeeding. In a galaxy that crushed hope and exalted obedience, success through reason was its own kind of heresy. The halls of the fortress monastery were quiet, but the silence carried weight. Reports from the Tyranid front had already traveled further than Batman realized. Scribble adepts in the administratum pored over casualty tallies and supply records. Something did not add up. Where losses should have been catastrophic, they were strangely low. Where ammunition expenditure should have drained reserves, the numbers showed efficiency. Victories had come swifter than projections allowed. One name surfaced again and again in these reports. A newly ascended Astartes, an enigma referred to by his brothers with whispers of unease. And in the Imperium, anomalies never remained unnoticed for long. The first to take note were not the chaplains or the captains, but the Inquisition. To them, deviation was as dangerous as heresy, perhaps even more so. In the dim chambers of an Ordo Xenos conclave, one Inquisitor laid the parchment reports before her peers. A warrior of the Astartes, efficient beyond doctrine. He fights with reason, not zeal. He resists the choir of indoctrination, and his mind is described as fortified. The others considered the words in silence. To the Inquisition, such descriptions were dangerous. A mind that resisted psychic influence could be shielded by discipline or by darker powers. The difference, they argued, was irrelevant. Both were threats until proven otherwise. One Inquisitor leaned forward, voice sharp as a blade. We must observe him, a tool of the Emperor perhaps, or a seed of corruption waiting to bloom. Either way, knowledge must be ours. A directive was issued. Records were to be gathered, witnesses interrogated, the movements of this warrior, this bat, tracked with precision. And though the reports carried no declaration of heresy, the mark was set. The Inquisition was watching. Within the chapter, librarians felt it too. They spoke cautiously of the strange walls in his mind, iron fortresses no psychic touch could pierce. Some argued it was discipline beyond reckoning, a willpower honed to impossible sharpness. Others whispered it was something else entirely, a shadow that even the warp hesitated to breach. No taint was detected, but that absence itself was alarming, for the warp touched all things in some measure. To be utterly untouched was not purity, but anomaly. Batman remained unaware of the scrutiny at first. To him, the aftermath of the Tyranid battle was simple: survival, victory, and preparation for the next war. Yet he noticed the shift in atmosphere. Captains studied him more carefully during councils. Chaplains' eyes lingered on him during sermons. Even his brothers spoke to him differently, their tone a mixture of admiration and distance, as though he stood apart. The silence between words grew heavier. One night, in the training chambers, he was approached by a figure robed in black, marked by the sigil of the Inquisition. The man's eyes were sharp, his presence heavy despite lacking the bulk of an Astartes. Your methods, the Inquisitor said, voice measured, achieve victories. But victories are not proof of loyalty. He stepped closer, his gaze unflinching. Tell me, warrior, do you serve the Emperor as God, or as ideal? Bruce did not answer immediately. He weighed the words, the implications. To declare the Emperor a god would be safe, the expected answer. To declare otherwise would brand him a heretic. But truth mattered more to him than safety. I serve humanity, he said at last, voice steady, resonant within his helm. If the Emperor embodies that cause, then I serve him. But justice is not blind obedience. It is discernment. The Inquisitor studied him in silence. At last he nodded once, curt and cold. We will see. Then he turned and left, his shadow lingering long after he was gone. The encounter spread quietly. No accusations were made, but the mark deepened. Inquisitors and librarians alike filed him under a new category. Not corrupted, not loyal, but watched. For in the Imperium, to be watched was as dangerous as open rebellion. And though Bruce did not fully grasp the machinery moving against him, he felt the weight of something vast pressing closer. Gotham had once judged him, misunderstood him, and sought to break him. Now, an empire spanning the stars is prepared to do the same. But where others saw danger, Bruce saw clarity. If the Inquisition watched him, then he had already made his mark. The galaxy had begun to notice. The Tyranids had been a predator. The Imperium itself was proving to be another. And Batman, even the detective, understood one truth above all. Predators who watched too closely often revealed their own weaknesses. The summons came without ceremony. In the cold chamber of the Stratiane commanders gathered around hololithic projectors, their armored silhouettes flickering with blue light. Above the table floated the image of a world, green fields, sprawling hive cities, oceans glistening beneath a distant sun. At first glance, it looked alive, even beautiful. But the Imperium did not see beauty. It saw corruption. The order was spoken with the weight of centuries. The taint of chaos has been detected upon this world. The Inquisition has decreed exterminatus. The planet is to be purged. No life may remain. The words echoed like a death knell. For most Astartes, there was no hesitation. To them, exterminatus was not cruelty but necessity, the only way to prevent heresy from spreading like rot across the stars. They accepted the decree as they had countless times before, without question, without thought. The Emperor's will had been declared, and they would obey. But Bruce Wayne did not move. Beneath his helm, his jaw clenched. His enhanced mind recalled every detail of the planet projected before them. Vast cities, agricultural settlements, unarmed populations, billions of souls who might never even know the word chaos. Could the taint of a cult justify the death of an entire world? Could a single flame condemn the forest? The meeting adjourned. His brothers prepared the rituals of fire, their chants filling the air with devotion to the Emperor's judgment. Yet Batman did not join them. Instead, he descended in silence to the planet itself. Cloaked in shadow, he walked its streets. He saw children laughing in the hive markets, farmers tending fields that stretched beneath the sun, workers laboring in factories with no knowledge of the Imperium's decree. The taint of chaos was there, yes, in hidden cults, whispered rituals, painted symbols in the dark corners of the underhive, but it was not everywhere. The corruption had not yet consumed them all. In the alleys of Gotham, Bruce had fought the same question countless times. Was justice punishment without distinction, or was it the pursuit of truth? Now that question echoed louder than ever, magnified by the scale of billions. Blind obedience would slaughter them all. Justice demanded something else. He returned to his brothers with his findings. There is corruption, he said, his voice steady but resolute, but it is not the planet entirely. Innocents remain. Billions who have no knowledge of what festers in the shadows. To kill them all is not justice. It is murder. The reaction was immediate. Some Marines turned their helms toward him in silence. Others growled, offended by the defiance in his tone. A chaplain stepped forward, voice like thunder. Your mind has been clouded by mercy. Mercy is weakness. The Emperor decrees through the Inquisition. Doubt in them is doubt in him. Bruce did not falter. Doubt in murder is not weakness. It is strength. If the Emperor is just, then blind slaughter without discernment is not his will. The chamber grew tense. To question exterminatus was unthinkable. It was not the place of an Astartes to judge, only to obey. And yet here was a warrior who dared to hold the line not against the enemy, but against the creed itself. Within him, Gotham's vow stirred. The memory of a boy kneeling in an alley beside his parents' lifeless bodies burned like a brand. He had sworn that day no innocent would die while he still drew breath. That vow had carried him through the alleys, into the armor of the Bat, and now into the ceramite shell of an Astartes. The galaxy had changed, but the vow had not. When the order for exterminatus came again, Bruce stood silent, his mind torn between two codes. One demanded obedience, the other demanded justice. For the first time in the 41st millennium, the Dark Knight felt the abyss between them open wide. The order had been sealed. The ritual of exterminatus was underway, sacred litany spoken, weapons primed. Soon, fire from orbit would rain upon the world, reducing every city, every life, to ash. For most Astartes, there was no hesitation. Their faith told them the Emperor's will was absolute, and obedience was their only duty. But Bruce Wayne had never been a creature of blind obedience. He waited until night to cloak the Hive City. While his brothers prepared for orbital withdrawal, Batman moved in silence, black cape trailing against the steel corridors of a warship not built for secrecy. Even in the form of a space marine, his instincts as Gotham's Dark Knight endured. The shadows were his ally, and in the Imperium's war machine, shadows always existed. He had seen them earlier that day, families huddled in cellars, workers who had no understanding of chaos rituals whispered in the underhive. They were not heretics. They were simply human, guilty of nothing more than living in the wrong place at the wrong time. To abandon them to fire was not justice. It was a slaughter. So he acted, slipping back to the surface with a small band of sympathetic brothers, initiates who had fought beside him, who had seen his strategies save lives. He orchestrated a covert extraction. They were few, no more than a handful, but under Bruce's direction they became ghosts in the hive. He mapped routes through forgotten tunnels, bypassed cult strongholds, and led civilians to hidden dropships. Every movement was planned with the precision of a predator hunting prey, only now the prey was dead itself. The civilians looked upon him with wide, fearful eyes. To them, he was not a savior but a giant in black armor, a god of war. Yet his voice, modulated and steady, calmed their terror. "Follow," he commanded. "Do not stop. Do not look back." They obeyed, for his presence was ironclad, unyielding, but never cruel. In him, they sensed something the Imperium rarely showed: mercy. Each group extracted was a victory measured in lives, not in kills. Thousands were moved under cover of night, hidden in transports shielded from orbital scans. Every decision carried risk. If discovered, he and those who followed him would be branded traitors, executed without hesitation. Yet he pressed on, because to do nothing would betray everything he had ever stood for. Among his brothers, dissent simmered. Some cursed his actions as weakness, swearing he endangered the chapter's honor. Others, quieter, saw him differently. "He fights for them," one whispered, watching him lead civilians through the tunnels. Not for glory, not for creed, for them. That whisper would grow into something larger: admiration, fear, and the seeds of a legend beyond doctrine. The exterminators came all the same. Orbital fire rained down, consuming the hives and the countryside in apocalyptic flame. The world burned, but in hidden ships that slipped through the smoke, thousands lived because one warrior chose to act. When Bruce returned, he did not announce what he had done. He stood among his brothers as the ashes settled, silent as ever. Yet suspicion lingered. Some guessed, some knew, and though no words were spoken, a line had been drawn. The Dark Knight was no longer simply a son of the Emperor. He was something else, a Marine who saved when all others were killed, a heretic in the eyes of zealots, a savior in the eyes of those who lived. For Bruce, there was no triumph in the act. He had saved thousands, yes, but billions had still perished. His vow was not fulfilled, only tested. Yet he knew one thing with certainty: he had chosen. In a galaxy of blind obedience, he had chosen justice, and choices have consequences. The planet burned. From orbit, the fires of exterminators consumed cities and seas alike, leaving only ash drifting on poisoned winds. To the Imperium, it was another victory, another world cleansed of chaos. To Bruce Wayne, it was a scar carved into his conscience. He had saved thousands, but billions had perished. The vow he carried from Gotham still held, but it rang hollow against the weight of so much death. Yet it was not the ashes of the planet that would haunt him most. It was the eyes of his brothers. They noticed his absence during parts of the purge. They noticed the way survivors whispered of a black-armored figure who had led them to safety. They noticed the quiet rumors spreading through the ranks. Civilians had lived, not by miracle, but by intent. And intent demanded an actor. Some denied it, unwilling to believe one of their own could stand against orders so sacred. Others suspected the truth almost immediately. The chapter council convened. Captains debated, their voices sharp, their words edged with accusation and uncertainty. "If he disobeyed," one said, "he is a danger to us all." Another countered, "He saved lives. Does that not also serve the Emperor who protects mankind?" The chaplains were unforgiving. Mercy is heresy. He has strayed from faith, and faithlessness is a plague. But among the rank and file, whispers spread in darker tones. Some called him the Shadow in Black, a brother who had dared to stand apart. Others branded him a traitor, one who valued mortal weakness above divine command. In a galaxy where faith defined loyalty, there was no middle ground. He was no longer simply a Marine. He was a question, a rift splitting the chapter from within. The Inquisition was not blind to this. Their agents, ever watchful, gathered testimony. Reports reached their vaults describing civilians hidden away, dropships departing in secret. A name attached itself to the anomaly: the Bat. One inquisitor read the reports in silence, his expression grim. "If true," he murmured, "this Marine defies not just doctrine, but the Emperor's judgment. That is not valor. That is rebellion." Orders were passed to monitor him more closely. Bruce felt the shift even without being told. Brothers who once nodded in camaraderie now averted their gaze. Some avoided him altogether, while others muttered oaths of loyalty louder than before, as if to distance themselves from his shadow. Yet he remained unrepentant. In private, he told himself what he had always believed: Justice was not defined by numbers, nor by blind obedience. It was defined by choice and the courage to make the right one even when the world called it wrong. He remembered Gotham, the police who had called him vigilante, the criminals who had called him demon, the citizens who had whispered his name in fear and hope alike. The Imperium was no different. It feared him because he revealed its cruelty. It whispered his name because he embodied something it had lost, the belief that individuals mattered. In the training halls, a younger Marine approached him once, hesitating before speaking. "Is it true?" the initiate asked quietly. "Did you save them?" Bruce regarded him for a long moment, then answered with only one word. "Yes." The initiate lowered his head, torn between awe and dread. Even that single word spread like wildfire, fueling both admiration and condemnation. The fracture widened. In time, it would not only mark Bruce as different, it would set him apart as dangerous, for the Imperium could tolerate much. Loss, endless war, even the shadow of corruption. But it could not tolerate independence. And Batman, by refusing to surrender his code, had made himself the most dangerous thing of all, a man who still believed in choice. The exterminatus was finished. The planet's name was struck from records, its ashes forgotten in the tide of endless war. But within the halls of the Imperium, his name began to spread. Savior, traitor, shadow, legend. And as Bruce stood in the silence of his cell, unflinching under the suspicion of his own brothers, he understood one truth with absolute clarity. He had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. From this moment forward, he would not only battle Xenos and heretics, he would battle the very system that claimed to own him. The Dark Knight's war in the 41st millennium had only just begun. It began as a rumor carried by frightened civilians who had escaped the fire. They whispered of a giant clad in black armor, a warrior who had stood between them and death when the Emperor's own angels had decreed their annihilation. They spoke of a Marine who did not kill indiscriminately, who shielded innocence even as the galaxy burned. At first, their voices were dismissed as grief-born fantasies. No Astartes could behave like that. No son of the Emperor would place mercy above command. But the whispers did not die. They grew. On hive worlds, factory workers repeated the tale in hidden corners where the Arbites did not tread. On agri worlds, farmers spoke of a dark knight who valued their lives as more than fuel for war. Among the downtrodden and the forgotten, a dangerous thing began to stir. Hope. Not the manufactured hope of the ecclesiarchy, built on litanies and distant promises, but something tangible. The belief that someone, even just one warrior, might see them not as expendable but as worth saving. Hope, in the Imperium, was treason. Within the chapter, the ripples spread as well. Younger Marines repeated the story with a mixture of awe and confusion. They spoke of Batman's tactical brilliance, his ability to save lives while still achieving victory. To them, he was not a heretic but a vision of what the Astartes could be. Veterans, however, bristled at the talk. He undermines the creed, they warned. He sows doubt. And doubt is the weapon of the enemy. Chaplains grew louder in their denunciations, their sermons sharpened into veiled warnings. Beware the shadow that cloaks itself in false mercy. The Emperor demands obedience, not sentiment. Those who place mortal weakness above divine command invite corruption. Yet the very need to speak such words betrayed their fear. They feared the contagion of an idea, the idea that the Imperium could be something other than endless sacrifice. For Bruce, none of this was sought. He did not crave legend or whispers. He had acted as he always had, to save lives where he could, to uphold justice in a galaxy that denied it. Yet he noticed the change. Civilians looked at him differently, not with the terror that Space Marines usually inspired, but with reverence. His brother's stares carried unease, not only because of what he had done, but because of what it represented. He had made choice visible in a world where choice was forbidden. And choice was contagious. Across battlefields, stories spread faster than truth. It was said he had turned back Tyranid swarms by outthinking them, that he had saved entire settlements from chaos by striking only at cult leaders instead of burning worlds. Exaggerations, perhaps, but each tale carried a seed of truth, and that seed was enough. Among citizens and soldiers alike, the Bat became a myth, not an angel of death, but a knight of shadows who remembered humanity. The Imperium noticed. The Inquisition sharpened its gaze. Reports piled high of civilians emboldened, of soldiers whispering of a different kind of Astartes. What began as simple observation grew into concern. Hope, one inquisitor remarked grimly, is the most dangerous heresy of all. it breeds thought. And thought breeds rebellion. Within his chapter, the divide deepened. Some argued that Batman's methods strengthened the Imperium by protecting the very citizens it was sworn to defend. Others saw him as a fault line that could fracture faith itself. Every battle he fought, every civilian he saved, added to the weight of the question, was he a savior, or was he a traitor waiting to bloom? Bruce felt the storm gathering but did not bend. He had walked this path before. Gotham had feared him, hated him, revered him, and misunderstood him. The Imperium was no different, only far larger, far crueler. He did not fight for their approval. He fought because justice demanded it, and justice, he knew, was never safe, never easy. But he also knew this: the shadows were moving. The more the Imperium whispered his name, the more likely it became that others, darker forces, would hear it too. And in the warp, whispers did not go unnoticed. On a world aflame with war, the forces of chaos advanced. Cultists screamed their profane chants, demons stalked through broken cities, and corrupted Astartes clad in twisted armor clashed with loyalists in endless slaughter. To the Imperium, it was yet another front in the eternal war. To chaos, it was a feeding ground. Blood, despair, and fear offered to the gods. But amid the carnage, something else stirred. A figure in black armor moved through the war zone with precision, not rage. He struck not for glory, but for purpose, guiding squads, rescuing civilians, dismantling cult strongholds with surgical efficiency. To the eyes of chaos, this was no ordinary marine. This was something different. In the Imperium, a Chaos Lord took notice. His gaze pierced the veil between realities, studying the anomaly that had begun to ripple across the Imperium. He saw a warrior who did not chant litanies, who fought without zeal, whose will was his own. In that defiance, the Lord recognized both danger and opportunity. For willpower such as this was a rarity in the 41st millennium, a prize that even the dark gods coveted. Whispers slipped through the warp, carrying on currents of madness. They reached into the cracks of Bruce Wayne's mind while he rested between battles. The visions came like dreams, vivid and insidious. He stood on a burning world, but instead of billions dying in fire, he saw himself commanding legions, saving entire planets with calculated brilliance. No civilians burned, no innocents perished. With us, the voice murmured, deep and resonant, you could save them all. No more compromise. No more chains of blind obedience. We will give you the power to do what your Imperium never allows. Bruce jolted awake in the silence of his chamber, his gauntleted fists clenched. The words lingered, curling in the edges of his mind like smoke. He knew their source, the warp, chaos, the very enemy he had sworn to fight. Yet the vision struck at his core. It offered not pleasure, not glory, but something more dangerous. The illusion of justice without restraint. The whispers did not stop. In the midst of battle, when bolters roared and demons howled, he sometimes heard faint echoes beneath the chaos of war. You fight for them, even when your brothers would let them burn. We are not so different, you and I. Break your chains, and no world needs to die again. His iron will resist, as it always had. He shut out the voices, forced himself to focus on reality, to anchor himself in the vow he had carried since that night in Gotham. Justice, not corruption. Discipline, not surrender. He had built walls in his mind that no psyker could breach, and those walls held strong against the tide of temptation. Yet the doubt lingered. The Inquisition hunted him for saving lives. His brothers whispered of heresy for showing mercy. The Imperium chained him with doctrine, demanding obedience above reason. Chaos offered freedom, poisoned, yes, but seductive in its promise. For the first time, Bruce recognized the most dangerous truth of this new war. The enemy did not always come with bolter and blade. Sometimes, it came with the whisper of agreement. The section closed with Batman standing alone on the battlefield, the corpses of cultists at his feet, the sky burning with warp fire. In the distance, he could almost hear the echo of laughter, mocking, patient, waiting. He raised his gaze skyward, his voice low but unshaken. I will not bend. His words carried no prayer, no plea, only certainty. Yet even certainty trembled against the knowledge that the shadows had found him, and they would not stop. The battlefields of the Imperium stretched endlessly, hive worlds aflame, frontier planets infested with cults, void lanes threatened by raiders. To most Astartes, each war was another note in the eternal litany of obedience. Fight, kill, obey, repeat. But for Bruce Wayne, the dark night of the 41st millennium, the galaxy had become something else, a chessboard. And chaos was the opponent whose moves he studied with relentless precision. It began small. A strike team here, a detachment there. Commanders unwilling to risk their forces allowed Batman leeway, if only to test his unorthodox methods. What followed were victories so swift and decisive that even skeptics could not dismiss them. Where other chapters would have unleashed orbital bombardments, Bruce infiltrated enemy lines, cutting the cult's leadership from within. Where others would have sacrificed entire settlements, he fortified choke points and led surgical strikes that turned chaos's hunger against itself. Civilians lived, casualties dropped, and whispers of his growing influence spread faster than the bolt of fire he directed. Among the men and women of the Imperium, hope took form in a name. Not the Emperor's, but another, the Bat. His image became legend, painted in chalk on hive walls, murmured in prayers alongside the Aquila. He was not just an Astartes, he was an icon. Proof that mercy and victory were not opposites but allies. Yet among his brothers, division deepened. Some followed him willingly, inspired by his clarity and efficiency. Others obeyed begrudgingly, bound more by respect for results than belief in his cause. And some whispered the word heresy, unable to reconcile his methods with the creed they had sworn to uphold. To them, he was dangerous not because he failed, but because he succeeded. The Inquisition's reports grew darker. He does not obey the chain of command. He acts without sanction. His victories are not victories of the Imperium, but of himself. They gave it a name, the Dark Crusade. To them, it was no campaign but rebellion dressed in armor. Yet the irony was bitter. Every system Batman touched was saved. Every civilian he protected lived to serve the Imperium another day. He was condemned not for failure, but for success achieved outside the lines. On the battlefield, however, the results were undeniable. In one campaign against a Chaos warband, Batman coordinated multiple strikes across a planet-wide front, predicting enemy movements with such accuracy that entire regiments of Traitor Guard collapsed within days. While his brothers fought with fury, he orchestrated with silence, his presence turning chaos into calculated order. When a Chaos sorcerer unleashed a warp storm across a city, Batman's foresight had already evacuated civilians and laid traps that broke the enemy's advance before it began. To those who followed him, it was brilliant. To those who feared him, it was proof that he thought more like a general than a soldier. But with every victory came scrutiny. High Lords asked why such efficiency was not theirs to command. Inquisitors demanded answers as to why obedience faltered when the Bat's shadow loomed. Rumors spread through the ecclesiarchy that his name drew more loyalty than their sermons. Hope, they whispered, was becoming heresy. Bruce himself did not seek command, yet it came to him regardless. Men followed him because he saved them, because he thought beyond slaughter, because he refused to abandon justice. Each success drew more to his cause, not in open rebellion, but in quiet faith that there was another way to wage war. The Dark Crusade was not declared, not sanctioned, not written into any record, but it had begun nonetheless, in the silence of his choices and the victories they produced. The section closed with Batman standing over a battlefield of broken Chaos warbands, the fires of victory casting his armored silhouette into stark relief. To civilians, he was a savior. To the Imperium, he was a threat. To Chaos, he was a rival. The galaxy itself seemed to tremble under the weight of the question his presence forced into being. Was he the Emperor's loyal son, or the heretic general of a war only he could lead? The Dark Crusade had begun. And with it, so too had the hunt. The halls of terror had seen countless declarations of war, edicts sealed in blood and parchment, names condemned to oblivion in the Emperor's name. Among these countless decrees, one more was added, seemingly small in the endless bureaucracy of the Imperium, but it carried the weight of an empire. The Inquisition had spoken. In chambers filled with incense and shadows, robed figures reviewed reports of victories won too cleanly, of civilians spared when they should have burned, of tactics that bent the codex and defied doctrine. They read testimonies of Marines inspired by a single brother who questioned orders, of civilians whispering prayers not to the Emperor, but to a shadowed knight in black armor. To the Inquisition, these were not stories of valor. They were symptoms of contagion. The Lord Inquisitor's voice carried no malice, only cold finality. This one is an anomaly. He acts outside sanctioned command. He inspires thought where there should be obedience. Such thought breeds doubt. Doubt breeds rebellion. And rebellion is the root of heresy. The gavel struck stone, a sound sharper than any bolt round. The verdict was sealed. An edict was issued. The one called the Bat was to be captured for interrogation, or destroyed if capture proved impossible. His name joined the endless list of those judged too dangerous to live, not for what he had done, but for what he represented. News spread swiftly through the Imperium's veins. Among the Estarts, the order was met with silence heavy as iron. Some nodded grimly, relieved that suspicion had finally become certainty. Others clenched their fists, unwilling to believe a brother who had saved lives could be condemned for it. To civilians, the whispers grew darker, more dangerous. The Bat, once their shadowed savior, was now an enemy of the Emperor. But for many, the Inquisition's edict only confirmed what they already believed. Anyone who would save them in defiance of the Imperium was worth more than all the zealots who demanded their sacrifice. For Bruce, the decree did not surprise. He had felt the noose tightening for months, the stares of chaplains, the probing questions of inquisitors, the unease of his own brothers. The Imperium had tolerated his difference only so long as it could deny it. Now it had chosen to crush him, as it always crushed anything that strayed from the narrow path of obedience. Alone in the silence of his chamber, Batman removed his helm and studied the scarred reflection in polished ceramite. He had been judged before. By Gotham's police, by criminals who called him a monster, by allies who questioned his obsession. Judgment was nothing new. What was new was the scale, an empire of 1,000,000 worlds, branding him heretic for daring to hold onto the vow he had sworn as a child. He felt no fear, only inevitability. The Imperium had declared him enemy, but he would not run. To run was to admit guilt, to surrender the very core of who he was. No, he would remain what he had always been, the shadow between fear and hope, the will that refused to bend. If they came for him, they would find not prey, but predators. Across the stars, agents prepared. Assassins of the Officio Assassinorum whispered of contracts sealed in silence. Inquisitorial warbands sharpened their blades and loaded their bolters, eager to carry out judgment. Whole strike forces were readied, for it was said this one Marine was no ordinary quarry. The edict was more than order, it was a prophecy. Somewhere in the warp, even chaos stirred with amusement. The Imperium hunted its own champion, and in doing so, revealed its own fear. The section closed with Batman stepping onto the training grounds, the light of distant stars glinting off the aquila that still marked his chestplate. He no longer wore it as a symbol of belonging, but as a reminder of the Empire that now called him traitor. He tightened his gauntlets, his voice low but resolute. They think I am hunted. They forget I am the one who hunts. And so the stage was set. The Imperium's judgment had fallen, and the hunt for the Dark Knight had begun. The Inquisition's edict had been issued, and the Imperium wasted no time in enforcing it. Among its many instruments of death, none inspired more fear than the Officio Assassinorum. Entire worlds had been reshaped by a single operative's blade, entire rebellions silenced by a whisper in the dark. To most, they were myths, unseen, unstoppable, inevitable. To Batman, they were something else. A challenge. The assassin chosen for his execution belonged to the Vindicare Temple, master of patience and precision. Days passed as the killer shadowed him, rifle in hand, waiting for the one perfect shot. Batman knew the hunter was there. He felt it in the silence, the unnatural stillness of the ruins he crossed. Every instinct screamed of eyes watching from afar. He had been hunted before in Gotham's alleys, in the streets where crime bosses sent killers to end him. The difference now was scale. The hunter was no thug, but a weapon engineered by the Imperium itself. The shot came at dusk. A whisper of displaced air, a round accelerated beyond mortal physics, cutting through the atmosphere faster than sound. But Batman was already moving. His enhanced senses and instincts guided him, cape flaring as the round missed by a fraction of an inch. He rolled into cover, analyzing in seconds, trajectory, angle, distance. A rooftop 400 meters away. The game had begun. The assassin adjusted, already moving to his next vantage. Batman, instead of retreating, advanced. He knew the psychology of hunters. They thrived on fear, on prey running. He would not run. He would make the hunter uncertain. Using smoke, misdirection, and the ruined city's architecture, he blurred his silhouette, forcing the assassin to waste shots on decoys and shadows. It became a duel of patience and intellect. The assassin set traps, motion sensors hidden in rubble, mines keyed to thermal signatures. Batman dismantled them silently, leaving false trails of heat to lure his enemy into revealing himself. When a trip mine detonated harmlessly against a decoy, Batman smiled beneath his helm. Shadows were his element, and here, in the ruins of war, he was home. The clash narrowed to close quarters. The Vindicator, realizing his quarry could not be eliminated from afar, struck with a mono blade, his movements silent, inhumanly precise. But Batman had fought assassins before. Every strike was parried not just with strength, but with foresight. Bruce read the assassin's stance, his weight shifts, the rhythm of his breathing. He countered with blows that bent ceramite and crushed stone, forcing the hunter onto the defensive. The battle ended in silence. The assassin lunged for the kill, blade arcing toward Batman's throat. But Bruce was faster. He disarmed his foe, twisted the weapon away, and with one calculated strike, incapacitated him. He could have killed him, any other Astartes would have, but instead he left the assassin unconscious, bound in his own traps. When the Inquisition found their prized killer alive but defeated, whispers spread like wildfire. An assassin had failed. One man, a single Astartes, had turned the Imperium's deadliest shadow back on itself. To civilians, the legend grew. The Dark Knight was untouchable, a figure who even the Emperor's hidden blades could not slay. To the Inquisition, the humiliation was intolerable. Bruce stood in the shadows after the battle, gazing at the fallen assassin. "You are not the first to hunt me," he said quietly, "and you will not be the last. But understand this, the shadows are mine." The Imperium had unleashed its sharpest knife. The Dark Knight had blunted it. And in doing so, he transformed from anomaly into legend. The chamber was a cathedral of judgment, its walls carved with the sigils of the Inquisition. Black-robed figures stood in semicircles, their eyes like blades, their voices sharp as bolter fire. At the center stood Batman, armored, unbowed, the aquila on his chestplate cracked and scarred. Shackles had been prepared for him, but he had not worn them. No Inquisitor had dared try. The lead Inquisitor's voice rang out, heavy with authority. "You stand accused of heresy. You defy the Emperor's will. You act outside command, inspire sedition, and place mercy above duty. How do you plead?" Batman's silence lingered, stretching the moment into tension so thick it could shatter. At last, his voice came, low and resonant, guilty of saving lives, guilty of refusing to slaughter innocents. If that is heresy, then the Imperium itself is guilty. The chamber erupted. Some Inquisitors snarled in outrage, demanding his execution on the spot. Others hesitated, unsettled by the weight of his words. Few had ever been challenged so directly, and fewer still had heard defiance spoken without fear. The lead Inquisitor struck the floor with his staff, silencing the hall. "You claim to serve justice above the Emperor. Justice is the Emperor's will. Your arrogance places you beyond salvation. You are no son of the Imperium. You are a traitor." Bruce met his gaze, unflinching. "Justice is not obedience. Justice is discernment. I swore long before your Imperium to protect the innocent. Your Emperor may embody that ideal, but you twist it into tyranny. You burn worlds to kill shadows. I refuse to become your executioner." For a moment there was silence. Even the Inquisitors who despised him found themselves struck by the clarity of his conviction. Some shifted uncomfortably, as though a hidden truth had been dragged into light. But the machinery of the Imperium could not bend. To allow his words to spread was more dangerous than any demon. The trial turned heated. Every accusation they hurled, heresy, arrogance, rebellion, he countered with logic, with truth. "You fear me," he said. "Not because I am corrupt, but because I will prove you wrong. You cannot kill chaos by killing hope. You cannot protect humanity by destroying it." His words echoed like thunder in the vaulted chamber, shaking even those who had come to condemn him. Yet compromise was impossible. The Imperium thrived on absolutes, loyalty or death, obedience or annihilation. To question was already to rebel. And Batman had not merely questioned, he had exposed. The judgment came swift. By decree of the Holy Inquisition, the lead Inquisitor declared, "You are no longer Astartes, no longer servants of the Imperium. You are outlaws, marked for death by all faiths." The words should have broken him. Instead, Batman felt a strange calm settle over him. He had been an outlaw before. Gotham had called him criminal, vigilante, and rogue. Yet in shadow he had become legend. The Imperium would be no different. The chamber turned violent. Guards raised weapons, bolters primed. But Bruce was already moving. Smoke filled the air, shrouding the Inquisitors in chaos. In the confusion, he struck with precision, not to kill, but to disable. Lights shattered, shadows reigned, and in the darkness the Dark Knight was unbound. By the time the smoke cleared, he was gone, leaving only bound guards and silence heavy as judgment itself. The Inquisitors raged, humiliated. The edict became absolute. Batman was to be hunted until death. Yet some among them, silent in the aftermath, wondered. His words had struck deeper than they cared to admit. Was he truly heretic, or was he something they could not afford to name? For the galaxy, a new legend was born. No longer simply a space marine, Batman became something greater. The outlaw knight, the fugitive savior. To the Imperium, he was a shadow. To the people, he was hope. And to chaos, he was prey yet to be broken. The warp was an endless night, a storm of madness where reality unraveled, where whispers became claws and shadows became teeth. Batman had fought demons, sorcerers, and the Inquisition itself, but even he could not bar the gates of his own mind forever. One night, while the war outside paused in uneasy silence, chaos slipped in. He dreamed, and in the dream he was home. Gotham stretched before him, but not as he remembered it. There were no screaming sirens, no alleys soaked in blood, no criminals lurking in the dark. The skyline gleamed with light free of corruption, a city reborn. The streets were calm, the air clean, the shadows quiet. Gotham perfect, unbroken. At first, he resisted. Dreams were illusions. He had trained his mind to cut through such tricks. But then he saw them, his parents, Thomas and Martha Wayne, alive. Their eyes warm, their arms open. They welcomed him not as a boy orphaned in an alley, but as a son who had never lost them. And for the first time since childhood, Bruce felt whole. The voice came then, low and coaxing, not as threat but as promise. This can be yours, a world without pain, a Gotham that never bleeds. No children cry in alleys, no innocents fall to crime. Accept our gift, and all you have lost will be returned. Bruce walked the streets. He saw criminals disarmed not by fists, but by absence of intent. No Joker, no Scarecrow, no Bane. The rogues who had defined his life were simply gone, never born, never needed. Gotham no longer needed Batman, for Gotham was safe. Peace, at last. His heart ached. For decades he had carried the weight of failure, the memory of 2 gunshots that shattered his life. Now, here was the impossible. Gotham healed, his parents alive, a mission fulfilled. Was this not the justice he had always sought? Yet, even in perfection, he noticed the cracks. A smile too wide. A laugh echoing faintly in a silent street. The glint of red in his father's eyes as he turned his head. His mother's comforting hand felt cold, like steel. The skyline shimmered, not with light, but with blood hidden beneath the glow. And then came the truth. The perfect Gotham began to warp, the buildings bending at impossible angles, the clean streets bubbling with rot. His parents' faces twisted, their eyes hollow voids. Their voices, once warm, became shrieks. "Stay," they begged. "Accept. End your war. You can have us forever if you just bow." The voice of chaos deepened, the illusion fracturing. "We offer peace. You offer only struggle. Choose us, and your vow will be fulfilled." Bruce fell to his knees as the city cracked apart around him, his hands digging into the cobblestones that dissolved into rivers of blood. For the first time in years, he felt temptation. Not power, not glory, but rest. Rest from the endless war, rest from guilt, rest from the vow that chained him. The offer was everything he had ever wanted. But then he remembered. He remembered Gotham as it truly was. Not perfect, not free of pain, but real. He remembered the vow he had made, not to erase the past, but to fight so no one else would feel it. Justice was not perfection, nor was it peace bought by surrender. Justice was struggle, choice, sacrifice. And sacrifice could never be bartered away. He stood. The dream collapsed around him, but his voice cut through the warp with steel. "You cannot give me what I seek. Gotham is gone. My parents are gone. And justice is not for sale." The illusion screamed and shattered, the city dissolving into madness. He woke in cold silence, armored chest heaving. Gauntlets clenched so hard the ceramite groaned. For a moment, the temptation lingered like poison. But only for a moment. He knew then that chaos had chosen its most dangerous weapon. Not rage, not fear, but hope twisted into lies. And if they thought that hope would break him, they had underestimated the dark night. The warp was not a place but a wound, a shifting storm of madness that clawed at mind and soul alike. Batman had resisted illusions before, but this was different. Now, chaos trapped him in a labyrinth of his own fears, each corridor bending with impossible angles, each door opening to memories that were not his own. He moved forward, each step echoing against stone that melted like wax, the world reforming around him with every breath. The first apparition appeared suddenly, the Joker. But no longer the clown prince of Gotham, this was a demon prince, skin stretched over bone, wings dripping with IQR, a laugh echoing like knives. "Why so serious, Bruce?" the thing crooned, dragging a talon across the floor. "You fought so hard to stop me, yet here I am, eternal, divine, unstoppable. Chaos is the punchline you could never kill." Batman did not strike, he observed. The creature's laugh repeated in the same cadence, its footsteps left no weight. It was a projection, a lie meant to unbalance him. "You're not him," Bruce muttered. "You're a copy. The real Joker is gone." The illusion shrieked, fractured, and dissolved into smoke. But the labyrinth twisted again. This time he stood in a fortress hall, surrounded by his fellow Marines. They leveled bolters at him, their voices a chorus of condemnation. Heretic, traitor, outlaw. Their chaplain raised a Crozius, voice like thunder. "The Emperor demands your blood." For a moment, doubt flared. He had seen these stares before, felt the weight of their judgment. But then his mind sharpened. He noted the insignias, wrong, mismatched. One Marine bore the marks of a chapter that had never fought beside him. Another's armor bore battle scars that had already healed. Inconsistencies, patterns, evidence of fabrication. "You lack detail," Bruce said coldly. "You're not them. You're an echo." The Marines collapsed into ash, their weapons dissolving in his hands. Deeper he went, the labyrinth twisting tighter. At last he found them again, his parents, standing in a golden light. Thomas and Martha Wayne reached for him, their voices breaking with grief. "Bruce, stop this madness. Stop fighting. Come home. You don't belong in this galaxy. Let go." Their faces were perfect, their embrace warm, their plea irresistible. For a heartbeat, he faltered. His vow burned within him, but so did his longing. The warp pressed harder, feeding on his hesitation, making the illusion sharper, sweeter. "Stay with us," Martha whispered. "End your war. You've suffered enough." But his detective's mind remained vigilant. He scanned their words, their breaths, their eyes. His mother's hand lacked a scar he had memorized from childhood. His father's voice repeated the same phrase, perfectly identical, like a machine. The imperfections betrayed them. He pulled away, his voice steel. "My parents are dead. I carry them with me. And you are nothing." The golden vision shattered into a storm of blood and screams. The labyrinth shook, walls collapsing, voices shrieking. Chaos raged against him, hurling visions faster, Gotham burning, Marines dying, worlds falling. But Bruce endured, not by denying fear, but by analyzing it. He saw the repetitions, the contradictions, the cracks in every mask. He broke each illusion with the one weapon chaos could never twist: reason. When at last the labyrinth crumbled, he stood alone in silence, armor scorched, mind scarred but unbroken. He knew the warp had gained something from this. Each vision had cut at his humanity, stripping pieces away. Yet his will had endured, his code unshaken. But he also knew a darker truth. Every time he faced the warp, it learned more about him. And one day, the labyrinth might not break first. The storm howled around him, a tempest of fire and shadow tearing through the fabric of reality. The warp surged with visions, with screams that were not screams, but thoughts made flesh. Batman stood at the center, his black armor battered, his mind strained, yet his will unbroken. For hours, or perhaps seconds, for time had no meaning here. He had endured the labyrinth of illusions. Now, at last, the voice that had haunted him emerged from the storm. The Chaos Lord appeared, vast and terrible, a figure shaped from writhing steel and molten flesh. His eyes burned like dying stars, his laughter echoing like a chorus of knives. "You are extraordinary," the Lord rumbled, his voice cutting through the warp like thunder. "A mortal who refuses to bend, a weapon forged of guilt and will. You could save them all if you were mine. Imagine dark night, worlds preserved, enemies crushed, your vow fulfilled without end. Accept me, and Gotham will live forever in your shadow." Bruce's cape snapped in the warp winds, his stance firm against the impossible weight of the storm. He did not answer at once. He studied the Lord as he would any predator, watching for flaws, for truth hidden in arrogance. And then, in a voice that was iron sharpened by decades of pain, he spoke. "You cannot offer me Gotham. You cannot offer me justice. All you can offer is chains painted gold." The Lord's laughter deepened, rolling like a quake. "Chains? You already wear them. The Imperium binds you. The Emperor shackles you. They fear you because you are more than their slaves. Join me, and you will have freedom. True freedom." Batman's eyes narrowed beneath his helm. Freedom without morality is just corruption. Justice without sacrifice is just tyranny. You call yourself eternal, but you are nothing more than chaos feeding on the weak. I don't serve weakness. The Chaos Lords surged forward, and the warp trembled. Their battle was not fought with weapons alone, but with will itself. Blades forged of psychic fire clashed against gauntlets of ceramite. Each strike carried visions of temptation, Gotham rebuilt, his parents alive, the Joker broken and gone forever. But Bruce countered each with his vow, with the memory of blood in an alley, with the truth that justice must be chosen, never granted. The Lord pressed harder, the storm shrieking. "All you have is pain, mortal. All you will ever have is loss." The words struck like claws, but Batman answered with a roar that cut through the madness. "And yet I stand." He struck, not with blind rage, but with precision, his fists breaking through the Lord's illusions, shattering the false Gotham, tearing apart the visions of peace until only the truth remained. For a moment, silence followed. The Chaos Lord staggered back, ichor dripping from a wound that was more symbolic than real. His voice, once mocking, now held a hint of frustration. "You cannot be claimed, but you will be broken. If not by me, then by the Imperium that hunts you. They already call you heretic. They will finish what I cannot." The warp storm receded, collapsing into itself with a sound like tearing glass. Batman fell to one knee, blood on his lips, his armor cracked, his body battered by the psychic war. Yet his mind was clear, sharper than ever. He had faced chaos at its most intimate, its most insidious, and he had not bent. Rising slowly, he looked into the collapsing storm. His voice was steady, defiant, unshaken. "You will not have me. Not today. Not ever." The Lord's laughter echoed one last time, fading into nothing. The warp dissolved, and Batman awoke in the material world, gasping for breath inside the ruins of a shattered temple. The air reeked of smoke and blood, but his will was unbroken. He had rejected chaos. He had emerged stronger. Yet even in victory, the shadows whispered of dread. For though chaos had failed to claim him, it had turned its attention elsewhere. The Imperium already hunted him, and now chaos would fan that flame. His survival was not only defiance, it was a declaration. He was no longer just a space marine, no longer just an outlaw. He was the Dark Knight of the 41st millennium, a man chaos could not corrupt. And that made him the most dangerous legend of all. It began in whispers. A child in the Underhive, hiding from arbitrators, murmured a story of a black-armored giant who had saved her village from fire. A guardsman at the edge of a battlefield repeated the tale of a marine who fought like no other, striking not with blind fury but with precision and purpose. A dock worker etched a crude bat symbol on the side of a freight container, swearing it would bring luck to the voyage. Everywhere the Imperium stretched, the whispers grew. On hive worlds, where life was cheap and death cheaper, citizens shared rumors in shadowed corners, careful to avoid the ears of the ecclesiarchy. On agri-worlds, farmers painted the symbol in hidden barns, believing it would keep their families safe when the sky darkened with war. In the barracks of Imperial guardsmen, soldiers spoke quietly of a warrior who saved civilians instead of abandoning them, who planned battles to minimize sacrifice rather than maximize destruction. His name was not spoken loudly, but always with reverence. The Imperium tried to silence it. Censors erased accounts. Arbites punished those who dared repeat the stories. Chaplains denounced the whispers from pulpits, warning that hope itself could be heresy. Yet, as in Gotham long ago, the harder authorities tried to smother the symbol, the stronger it grew. For every tale erased, 10 more were whispered. For every punishment carried out, the myth spread further. The Bat had become more than a man. For Bruce, this transformation was familiar. In Gotham, he had forged himself into a symbol so criminals would fear the shadows. In the 41st millennium, he became something else. a myth of justice in a galaxy that had long forgotten the word. Civilians who had never seen him claimed they had. Soldiers who had never fought beside him swore they had witnessed his tactics. The truth no longer mattered. The idea was alive, and an idea is harder to kill than any man. In dark alleys, children chalked the outline of bat wings on walls. In forgotten frontier settlements, citizens prayed not just to the emperor but also to the bat, asking for protection when the next war came. Guardsmen before battle traced the shape of wings onto their armor, believing it would bring survival. To the downtrodden, he was given hope. To the Imperium, he was contagious. The Inquisition raged. Reports flooded their halls. Heretical symbols scrawled in shadows, whispers of a savior who rivaled the emperor's angels. They declared the stories lies, propaganda seeded by chaos. But denials rang hollow when more and more evidence of his victories surfaced. Planets saved, cults destroyed, civilians alive where none should have survived. The myth could not be undone because the myth was true enough to terrify those in power. Within the ranks of the Astartes, the division deepened. Some scoffed at the stories, dismissing them as dangerous exaggerations. Others, particularly younger initiates, clung to them, inspired by the idea of a warrior who was more than a weapon, who could still be human beneath the ceramite. In the quiet of barracks and mess halls, they repeated the whispers not as heresy, but as hope. Bruce himself knew the danger of symbols. He had wielded them before, and he knew they could inspire as much as they could consume. To be myth was to lose control. The man vanished, leaving only what people wanted him to be. But he also knew that the Imperium could never kill a symbol. They could break men, burn worlds, silence voices, but an idea lived on. And so he allowed it to spread. He fought in shadows, his presence brief but undeniable, enough to fuel new stories. Each time he saved a life, each time he defied destruction, the myth grew. He did not seek worship, but he understood the power it gave him. In a galaxy where the Imperium ruled through fear, his legend gave people something else: defiance. The section closed with an image of a hive wall, its bricks cracked and worn. Upon it, drawn in charcoal, was the shape of a bat, wings spread wide. Beneath it, in shaky handwriting, were words whispered across the stars. The bat watches. The bat protects. For the Imperium, it was heresy. For the people, it was hope. For Batman, it was both a weapon and a curse. The Inquisition had tolerated whispers long enough. What began as scattered rumors had swelled into a tide the Imperium could no longer ignore. Citizens etched his symbol on walls. Guardsmen spoke his name before battle. Even Astartes initiates repeated his story in secret. For an empire built on obedience and silence, the bat was poison. The decree was made clear. The Dark Knight was not merely a rogue marine. He was an existential threat to imperial unity. Propaganda machines turned their full fury upon him. Vox broadcasts denounced him as a false savior, a chaos puppet, a traitor who lured innocents to damnation. Posters showed him draped in shadow, his symbol warped into heresy. Priests thundered from pulpits that to whisper his name was to spit upon the emperor's throne. But propaganda carried a paradox. To denounce him was to acknowledge him, and each denunciation planted his name into the minds of those who had never heard it. Where the Imperium saw suppression, the people saw proof. If the ecclesiarchy feared the bat so deeply, then perhaps he was real. Perhaps he was what they said he was not: a savior. The Inquisition escalated further. Kill teams of stormtroopers were dispatched to hives and villages, hunting those who painted bat symbols on walls or whispered his stories in dark corners. Families vanished overnight. Entire regiments were purged for suspected sympathy. Inquisitorial agents scoured data tombs, erasing accounts of battles where civilians had survived under his shadow. To believe in him became punishable by death. And yet, the crackdown only made the myth stronger. Survivors whispered of neighbors dragged away by black-armored soldiers for saying his name. To the oppressed, this did not erase the bat, it canonized him. If the Imperium feared him so much, then surely he was worth fearing. Each attempt to erase him became another story, another legend of defiance. The harder the Imperium pressed, the brighter his shadow burned. Bruce knew what was happening. He had seen it in Gotham, the symbol becoming larger than the man. He had built it once before, and now, even without meaning to, he had built it again. But this time, the stakes were galactic. The Imperium could kill him, but they could never kill what he had become. His survival was no longer about his own life. It was about keeping the legend alive. The Bat had to endure because the Bat had already escaped him. In secret, Batman struck where he could. Small victories that left marks impossible to erase. A convoy of prisoners vanished into the night, later resurfacing free. An Imperial propaganda station collapsed, its walls covered in bat symbols daubed in soot. A guardsman regiment on the edge of desertion found supplies mysteriously delivered, enough to hold the line against chaos for another day. Every action he took, however small, rippled across the Imperium. Citizens whispered not of his face, but of his shadow, his symbol, his defiance. The Inquisition fumed, their grip tightening, their executions growing swifter, harsher. But the truth spread faster than their fear. For every symbol erased, 10 more appeared. For every voice silenced, 20 more whispered. The Imperium was learning the lesson Gotham's criminals had once learned. You cannot kill an idea. You can only give it power by fearing it. The section closed with the image of a ruined hablock, its walls scorched from Arbite's flamers. Amidst the ashes, a child had scrawled a crude bat symbol in charcoal. No words accompanied it, no whispers, no defiance spoken aloud. But the mark was enough. It would spread. It would endure. The crackdown had failed. The galaxy was changing, though few dared admit it aloud. Where once only silence and obedience reigned, something new had begun to spread, not in decrees or sermons, but in symbols scrawled on walls, in stories whispered in the dark, in acts of quiet defiance. The Bat was no longer just a figure who stalked the night. He had become something far greater, an idea. On hive worlds, workers daubed crude bat symbols on their machinery before beginning shifts, a silent rebellion against the Arbites who watched them. In frontier colonies, farmers carved wings into the earth, visible only from above, daring Imperial patrols to see and fear it. Soldiers etched the mark into the grips of their lasguns, carrying it into war like a talisman. Each act was small, almost insignificant, yet together they formed a tide that no edict could wash away. Batman saw it with his own eyes. From the shadows of a ruined city he watched as citizens lit fires in the shape of wings across rooftops, a silent vigil that spread like flame through the night. No words were spoken, yet the meaning was unmistakable. They were declaring their allegiance not to an empire, but to an idea, to him. For the first time since Gotham, Bruce Wayne understood fully what he had become. He had started as one man, waging war on crime to avenge his parents. He had built a myth to frighten criminals, to make the shadows his weapon. Now, across the stars, the same myth had taken root. He was no longer just a warrior. He was a movement, a memory, a symbol. He was defiance itself, and that realization was both his greatest strength and his heaviest burden. In quiet moments he grappled with the truth. The Imperium hunted him not because of what he had done, but because of what he represented. Chaos whispered his name in mockery, eager to claim him, while the Inquisition sought to erase him. Yet neither truly fought the man anymore. They fought the idea. And an idea was harder to kill than any Marine. Still, the danger was clear. The stronger his legend grew, the more united his enemies became. The Imperium and Chaos, enemies eternal, had found common ground. The Bat was dangerous to both. If he survived, the myth would spread further. If he fell, his death would canonize the legend forever. Either way, the galaxy was shifting around him. Batman understood that his war was no longer about his life alone. He could be captured, broken, even killed, but the idea would remain. Already, others had begun to fight in his shadow. Cells of rebels used his methods. Stealth over slaughter, precision over destruction, saving the weak rather than sacrificing them. They did not wear his armor, but they carried his creed. The Bat had multiplied. From the rooftop of a shattered hablock, Bruce looked out over a city half destroyed by war. Fires burned in the distance, the Imperium's banners draped across ruined spires. Yet below, in the streets, the people lit torches in patterns of wings, their glow spreading like veins of light through the darkness. He stood silent, cape billowing in the ash-laden wind, watching the myth take form before his eyes. In that moment, he was no longer Bruce Wayne, no longer Astartes, no longer fugitive. He was a symbol. He was a legend. The Bat of the 41st millennium. But legends carried weight, and shadows attracted enemies. He knew this was only the beginning. The more his myth spread, the more ferociously it would be hunted. The Imperium would unleash its fury. Chaos would redouble its temptations and assaults. Even the people he inspired might suffer for the hope he gave them. Yet he did not falter. for he understood what he had once told Gotham whispered beneath its rain-soaked alleys: a man can be destroyed, but an idea can endure forever. And so the section closed with him standing alone against the burning skyline, watching the people below claim his symbol as their own. He was not alone anymore, the bat lived in them, and if that made him enemy of gods and empires alike, then so be it. The galaxy had turned its gaze upon one man. From the frozen moons of the Segmentum Obscurus to the blazing hives of Armageddon's outer rims, the name whispered in fear, and hope was the same. The Bat. The Imperium called him heretic, Chaos named him rival. And between those titanic forces, the Dark Knight moved like a phantom, unseen, unpredictable, unstoppable. The Inquisition struck first. Fleets of black ships scoured the sectors where his legend had taken root, glassing entire colonies in the name of purification. Whole populations were condemned simply for drawing his symbol in ash, or whispering his name in prayer. Vox broadcast declared that the Shadow Marine was a servant of the ruinous powers, a false god of rebellion. Yet the very scale of their fury only magnified his myth. On worlds reduced to rubble, survivors found the bat carved into ruins that refused to burn, a message from the void itself. You cannot kill the idea. But Chaos did not stand idle. Across the warp, warbands howled his name, their leaders intrigued by the mortal who had defied both empire and hell. Some sought to destroy him, others to corrupt him, believing that if they could not claim his soul, they could at least taint his symbol. Demon princes dispatched fleets, whispering promises of alliance to those foolish enough to listen. In the name of their dark gods, they unleashed fire upon the worlds where his mark appeared. To Chaos, the bat had become something intolerable, a mortal will that refused to yield to the divine madness of the warp. Between these two juggernauts of destruction, Batman stood alone. He was hunted across star systems, his every movement shadowed by agents, assassins, and demons. Yet he adapted. Where the Imperium sent fleets, he planted misinformation, scattering phantom signals that led them into ambushes against Chaos warbands. Where Chaos unleashed corruption, he struck first, assassinating cult leaders before their rituals could take form. Worlds that should have been consumed were instead left eerily untouched, their inhabitants whispering of black wings seen in the smoke. He fought not as an army, but as a mind. Every battlefield was a puzzle, every opponent a pattern waiting to be broken. He used the Imperium's own paranoia against it, manipulating data streams so that inquisitorial fleets collided with Chaos incursions mid-route. Planets burned, yes, but not by his hand. He was the invisible conductor of a symphony of war, turning his hunters upon each other. In one of the most infamous campaigns, the Imperium and Chaos both descended upon the mining world of Elektra the Ninth, each believing Batman to be hidden there. As the sky filled with fire, their forces clashed in orbit and on land, neither realizing that the Dark Knight had never set foot on the planet. From a neighboring moon, Bruce watched the spectacle through a cracked visor, his voice calm over encrypted vox. They fight ghosts because they fear shadows. He was only one man, but through strategy, deception, and impossible willpower, he had become an army of one. Still, every victory came with a cost. Entire sectors burned. Innocents died. The galaxy convulsed around his legend. Even as he saved lives where he could feel the weight of the war pressing down, the grim irony that his existence now drew more destruction than any he had once fought to prevent. Yet to stop was to surrender, and surrender was the one thing he had never known how to do. Among the people, his myth only grew. They told stories of how he turned fleets upon themselves, how demons vanished into mist at the sight of his shadow. Children whispered that he had no body, only a voice in the dark that struck when injustice rose. The Imperium called it heresy. Chaos called it mockery, but the people called it hope. As the section closed, Batman stood on the bridge of a derelict ship drifting through the void, stars reflecting off his armor like shards of memory. Around him, the galaxy burned, not with unity, but with confusion and fear. He had become the variable no one could predict, the ghost that haunted both gods and men. And though he was hunted by billions, one truth remained. He was not losing. He was teaching the galaxy to think. The galaxy burned, and in its flames, Batman saw opportunity. Chaos and the Imperium had both declared war upon him, hurling armies and fleets across the stars in a crusade of annihilation. To any other being, it would have been the end. Two empires of destruction converging to erase one man. But Batman was not a warrior driven by instinct or faith. He was a strategist, a detective, a mind honed to see order where others saw madness. And now he would turn the madness against itself. He began with data, intercepted Vox channels, encoded astropathic signals, and warp signatures. Each fragment of information became a piece of the puzzle. Through stolen cogitators and captured cultists, Bruce mapped the movements of both sides. The Imperium's purges, the Chaos Warband's assaults, both predictable, both driven by arrogance. He saw the pattern of their hunger, the rhythm of their crusade, and into that rhythm he would place a single, deliberate discord. On the world of Vathros Prime, he seeded false transmissions, convincing Chaos commanders that an inquisitorial relic lay buried beneath the planet's crust. At the same time, he sent encrypted distress signals to Imperial command, proving that Chaos forces had begun to gather there for ritual sacrifice. Both sides took the bait. Within days, entire fleets dropped from the warp, each convinced the other was preparing an ambush. From the void above Vathros, the battle erupted. Chaos unleashed its demonic hosts. The Imperium answered with orbital fire. For a week, the skies burned. The planet itself cracked under the fury of armies that did not realize they were fighting a phantom. Batman watched from a derelict monitoring post on a nearby moon, the light of destruction reflected in his eyes. "They believe the enemy is each other," he murmured, his voice low, calm. "Good. Let them be right." The brilliance of the plan lay not only in deception but in its precision. Every false lead he planted was calculated to align with truth, enough reality to make the lie unassailable. As the two powers annihilated each other, Batman's operatives, civilians, deserters, and those who still believed in his cause, moved silently beneath the chaos, evacuating settlements, freeing prisoners, and saving those doomed by proximity to war. By the time the smoke cleared, millions who would have perished were gone, spirited away into the void. But the cost was heavy. The Inquisition declared the massacre proof of his heresy, branding him the architect of both Imperial and Chaos losses. Entire Astartes chapters were dispatched to hunt him. Even among his few allies, faith wavered. To them, his actions looked indistinguishable from manipulation, his victories soaked in blood and deception. The legend of the Bat grew darker, savior to some, monster to others. Alone in the aftermath, Bruce stood amid the wreckage of his plan. The surface of Vathros burned below, its once blue oceans turned to glass. The air crackled with residual warp energy. He closed his eyes, hearing the distant echoes of screams and prayers alike. "They'll call it heresy," he said quietly. "They always do." A faint transmission reached him through the static, a child's voice, recorded from an evacuation pod. "Thank you, Bat." He allowed himself a breath, not of triumph, but of grim resolve. His masterpiece had worked. The Imperium and Chaos had devoured each other, if only for a moment, and the innocent had survived. It was a fleeting victory, a reprieve bought with deception and blood. But it was a victory nonetheless. As he turned away from the burning planet, the void swallowed his words, carried only by silence. "You call it heresy. I call it justice." The fires of Vathros Prime still burned in the void, their glow flickering against the hull of Batman's stolen strike cruiser. From orbit, the planet looked like a dying ember, cracked and trembling beneath the weight of its own ruin. He watched in silence, the reflection of the inferno dancing across his visor. Thousands had escaped because of his deception, millions had not. The arithmetic of war was merciless. In Gotham, he had saved one life at a time. Here, in the endless dark, every decision killed as many as it spared. Reports flooded through intercepted Vox channels. The Imperium called him the architect of anarchy, accusing him of orchestrating the massacre of 2 Imperial fleets. Chaos warlords spat his name in rage, vowing to drag his soul screaming into the warp. Even among those he had saved, gratitude twisted into fear. To many, he was no longer a hero. He was a phenomenon, unstoppable and terrifying, a force that warped the fates of worlds merely by existing. In the lower decks of the cruiser, his few remaining allies argued in hushed tones. Some wanted to flee, to vanish into deep space where neither empire nor demon could reach them. Others begged him to strike again, to turn his genius upon the heart of the Imperium itself. But Batman said nothing. He listened to the chaos around him, the same kind of chaos he had spent a lifetime fighting, and felt the quiet weight of isolation settle on his shoulders once more. He descended to the ship's observation bay, the hum of machinery echoing through metal corridors scarred by battle. Removing his helm, he stared at the stars. His reflection stared back. Eyes bloodshot, jaw clenched, the faint silver of scar tissue crossing his face. In stillness, he whispered to himself, "I saved them, but I didn't save enough." The words disappeared into the hum of the engines. Below, the galaxy tore itself apart. The Imperium redoubled its crusade, declaring the Shadow heresy. Entire sectors were purged, their populations wiped out under suspicion of allegiance to the Bat. Chaos warbands hunted those who dared to follow his example, slaughtering innocents in his name. For every life he preserved, a dozen were lost. Yet even in that bloodshed, his legend persisted. Symbols kept appearing, painted in soot on the ruins of cities, carved into the armor of deserters, glowing faintly on the hulls of derelict ships adrift in the void. Batman understood the paradox. To fight tyranny in a world built on tyranny was to perpetuate the war forever. Every act of defiance demanded a price. Every victory fed the myth that enslaved him. But still, he refused to stop. For if the galaxy ever silenced that refusal, that singular, unyielding no, then all hope would truly die. He returned to the command deck. The ship's cogitator relayed fresh orders from the Imperium's High Lords. Extermination protocols for any system suspected of harboring Bat sympathizers. Bruce scanned the data, jaw tightening. "They'll burn half the galaxy," he said. One of his lieutenants, a scarred guardswoman he had rescued months before, met his gaze. "Then we'll give them something worth burning for." Outside, lightning flared across the void as warp storms rolled through, cutting off whole sectors. The universe seemed to convulse in rhythm with his own fatigue. He could almost hear Gotham's rain again, the steady, relentless sound that had once comforted him. He imagined his parents' faces, not in grief but in quiet pride. They would have told him to rest. But rest was a mercy he no longer believed in. Standing before the viewport, he watched the fractured light of distant battles, each one a spark in the dark. "They'll never stop coming," whispered the guardswoman behind him. Bruce's reply was almost gentle. "Neither will I." The cruiser turned slowly, its engines igniting like twin suns as it vanished into the void. Behind it, the remnants of war drifted, fragments of ships, echoes of screams, the ghosts of victories that cost too much. Ahead lay more darkness, more battles, more impossible choices. He would fight them all. Not for peace, not for redemption, but for defiance itself, the final, eternal truth of the Dark Knight. In a galaxy that knew only war, his refusal to surrender was the closest thing to victory anyone would ever see. The sky above the dead world of Karen burned with twin fires, one red, one black. The fleets of the Imperium clashed with the armadas of chaos, their fury lighting the void like a dying sun. Across the planet's surface, the land trembled under bombardment. Cities long reduced to rubble collapsed into dust. Between the thunder of bolters and the screams of demons, a lone figure moved through the storm, his armor scorched, his cape torn to ribbons, his every breath a promise of resistance. The Dark Knight of the 41st millennium had come to fight his last war. The Inquisition had cornered him at last. Dozens of kill teams encircled the ruins of Karen's capital, their purity seals fluttering in the ash. Above them, chaos warbands descended like carrion, eager to claim the same prize. Batman stood at the center of it all, a shadow against the apocalypse. Around him, the bodies of fallen Marines, Imperial and traitor alike, lay scattered like broken idols. He tightened his grip on his shattered blade and whispered, almost to himself, one more time. The first to strike were the inquisitorial assassins. They emerged from the haze like ghosts, Vindicare snipers, Eversa berserkers, blades flashing in the light of the burning sky. Batman moved faster. He weaved between them, each motion a symphony of precision. He broke a sniper's rifle with one strike twisted beneath another's blade, and drove his gauntlet into Eversa's throat, shattering armor and bone in a single blow. His movements were slower than they once were. Every strike weighted with exhaustion, but his will drove him beyond flesh. Then the demons came. The air thickened with the stench of rotten ozone as creatures of the warp clawed their way into reality. A hulking demon prince towered over the battlefield, its voice a guttural roar. "You cannot stop eternity, mortal." Batman's reply was quiet but absolute. "Neither can you." He hurled himself forward, a blur of black against crimson flame. His blade met the demon's claws, sparks and ichor spraying through the air. The monster swung, each blow capable of crushing tanks, yet Bruce danced between them, finding rhythm in chaos. He leapt onto the creature's arm, drove his gauntlet deep into its flesh, and tore free a shard of its essence. The demon screamed as it imploded, the warp consuming its remains. But victory brought no respite. The Inquisition advanced again, mistaking the demon's death for a sign of heresy, proof that the bat had consorted with chaos. Orbital cannons opened fire, turning the city into molten glass. Bruce ducked into cover, his armor glowing red from heat. His vox crackled, voices of survivors, fragments of resistance, people calling his name. The bat, he's still fighting. He smiled grimly beneath his helm. Then, so will they. The battle became chaos incarnate. The Imperium's zeal met the madness of the warp, and between them, Batman moved like a spectre, unseen, unyielding. He planted charges in the ruins, collapsing buildings onto advancing forces. He hacked an orbital relay, redirecting bombardments onto chaos strongholds. Every move he made turned slaughter into strategy. Yet, for every victory, his strength waned. His armor cracked, his lungs burned, and his blood mixed with ash. Still, he would not fall. At the heart of the city stood the ruins of a cathedral. Its spires burned, its walls half devoured by warp fire. There, surrounded by enemies beyond number, Batman made his final stand. He fought until his weapons shattered, until his fists bled through ceramite, until every breath became agony. The Inquisitor leading the assault raised his blade and shouted, "By the Emperor's will, you will die, heretic." Batman's reply was a whisper lost in the storm. Then he'll have to try harder. Lightning struck the cathedral. The explosion tore through the city, vaporizing everything in a blinding flash. When the dust settled, nothing remained but ruin. Nobody was found. No armadura. Only a single, scorched symbol, the outline of bat wings, carved into the stone floor where he had stood. The battle ended, but the legend did not. In the aftermath, survivors spoke of a shadow moving through the smoke, saving the wounded before vanishing into the dark. Some said he had died. Others swore he had ascended, becoming something beyond flesh. The Imperium recorded it as annihilation. The people called it deliverance. And in the void between stars, where light and law no longer reached, a lone voice whispered through the static of dying vox signals, "I'm not done yet." The war ended, but the silence that followed was not peace, it was awe. The world of Karen was dead, scorched to glass, its sky filled with drifting debris. The Imperium claimed victory, declaring that the heretic known as the Bat had been purged in holy fire. Chaos, too, whispered that the mortal had perished, his soul devoured by the warp. Yet across the stars, something lingered, something neither Empire nor God could name. It was not a man, nor a sound, nor a shape. It was an idea whispered from one survivor to another. He's still out there. On hive worlds, under the curfew of the ecclesiarchy, children scrawled the bat symbol in soot upon the walls, though none could say where they had learned it. On frozen moons, soldiers traced it in the frost on their armor before battle. On distant colonies where the Emperor's light had long faded, the mark appeared carved into stones, painted on hulls, etched into memory. It meant many things to many people: rebellion, protection, justice, but to all, it meant hope. The Imperium tried to erase it. They outlawed the symbol, burned whole settlements accused of spreading it. Propaganda denounced it as a curse of chaos, but the more they silenced it, the louder the whisper grew. The more they buried it, the deeper it became. Even among the Astartes, in hidden corners of their fortresses, some still spoke of the Dark Knight who fought for the innocent when even gods turned away. In the ranks of the Inquisition, some doubted. Reports surfaced of impossible rescues, prisoners vanishing before execution, and refugees saved from bombardment by an unseen hand. Entire chaos rituals disrupted by a shadowed figure that left behind only the mark, 2 wings spread in defiance. No one could prove it. No one could disprove it. And perhaps that was the point. The truth no longer mattered. The man was gone, perhaps dead, perhaps something else. What endured was the meaning he carried, the idea that justice could exist without divine sanction, that morality could survive even in the dark. The legend of the Bat became the quiet counterpoint to the Imperium's endless dogma, not a rebellion of arms, but of belief. On one nameless world, a guardsman knelt in the mud beside a dying comrade. As shells fell and skies burned, he whispered a story of a marine who stood alone against gods and empires, who fought not for glory but for the people beneath his feet. The comrade smiled weakly and murmured, "He sounds like a ghost." The guardsman shook his head. No, he's what we're supposed to be. In the millennia that followed, the legend changed shape. Some said he was a saint of the Emperor, a secret angel who still walked unseen. Others swore he was a demon of vengeance, punishing both heretics and hypocrites. The truth shifted with every retelling, but the symbol never changed. It endured through ages of fire, through empires that rose and fell, through stars that died. And somewhere in the void, beyond the reach of light and faith, a shadow moved. No name, no words, no face, only the faint glint of armor and the flutter of a cape against the silence. The voice that once haunted Gotham, that once defied gods, now whispered across eternity. I am the night. The Imperium could not kill him. Chaos could not claim him, because he was never just a man. He was the unbroken symbol, the eternal shadow, the proof that even in a galaxy consumed by war, one idea could still stand against the dark. There are no records of what truly happened on Charon. The official archives declare it annihilated, reduced to cinders in the Emperor's name. The Inquisition closed the file, branding the incident a containment success. Yet in the centuries that followed, the whispers refused to die. There were reports, inconsistent, unverifiable, impossible, of a figure seen in the smoke of battlefields, a black silhouette watching from the ruins before vanishing into the void. To the Imperium, these were heresies. To the people, they were hopeful. Some said the Dark Knight fell during the bombardment, consumed in fire alongside his enemies. They called it a noble death, the final act of a warrior who refused to yield. Others swore he still walked among the stars, his armor scorched but unbroken, fighting in silence where no light reached. There were even those who claimed he had entered the walk itself, not as a demon, but as something else entirely, a shadow that hunted shadows. A guardian that struck down demons from within their own realm, unseen, unending. No one could prove the truth. Perhaps that was the point. Batman had always understood that symbols mattered more than certainty. Gotham had learned it centuries ago, now the galaxy learned it anew. The Dark Knight's strength had never been his power or his armor, it was the idea he embodied, that one man armed with will alone could stand against impossible odds and refuse to fall. That justice, even buried under millennia of war, could still breathe. Across the Imperium, that idea endured. On forgotten worlds, miners told stories of a black angel who appeared in the darkest nights. Soldiers whispered prayers to the silent watcher before going to war. Even among inquisitors, some kept his symbol hidden beneath their robes, not as heresy, but as reminder. They had learned, through fear or faith, that the bat could not die because he was never meant to live. He was the shadow that bound men to the thought of something greater than survival, of purpose, of conscience, of choice. Chaos, too, remembered him. Demon princes cursed his name in the warp, claiming to hear the echo of his voice in the void. They said it mocked them, cut through their eternal howling, a single mortal defying eternity. To them, he was the nightmare they could not unmake, the one mind that had faced the warp and walked away unbroken. Millennia passed. Empires rose and fell. The Imperium devoured itself and was reborn 100 times. Yet through every age, in the dust of every ruin, the mark remained. 2 wings spread in defiance, sometimes scratched onto the wall of a prison cell, sometimes painted in the blood of tyrants, sometimes traced into the sand by a child who had never heard the name Batman, but somehow knew what it meant. The universe forgot the man, but it never forgot the symbol. And somewhere, beyond time and faith, the shadow endured. In the endless dark between galaxies, a derelict ship drifts through the void. Its lights are long dead, its crew long gone. Yet deep within its corridors, a faint motion stirs. Metal creaks. A silhouette moves, slow, deliberate, silent. In its hand, a broken blade glimmers faintly in the starlight. For a moment, the figure pauses before a cracked viewport, the galaxy stretching endlessly beyond. Then, as if sensing the weight of eternity itself, it turns and walks back into the dark. Was it him? Or just a story? The truth has long since ceased to matter. What endures is what he left behind, the unbroken belief that even in the grim darkness of the far future, there will always be someone who refuses to bow. The Dark Knight's war never ended. It simply became the galaxy's memory of resistance, a shadow without beginning or end, cast across eternity. And in the silence of the void, where even stars dare not speak, a whisper travels like a heartbeat through the cold. I am the night.